Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And the topic of this 10-minute moan is a fantastic piece of writing by Graham Grant of the Scottish Daily Mail. I found this online this morning and it looks to me as if it's probably been published in today's printed edition, where he's done his thoughts on, it's a snapshot of the SNP party and the shambles that they're in. Now, his headline is, Swinney's in charge of a zombie regime, shuffling to a day of reckoning, and it can't come soon enough. Can't disagree with that, can you? So that's the headline, and his article goes on to say the outcome of the general election was a heavy blow for the SNP, but for now it remains in office, and nominally at least in power. Its loss of 38 seats on July 4th signalled a haemorrhaging of support for the Nationalists, leaving their separatist project on life support. But the bleak reality is that in the meantime, they're still saddled with them and will be probably until next Holyrood election in May 2026. Nearly 2 years of SNP rule lie ahead, with nothing to suggest there will be any improvement on the previous 17. Indeed, all indications are that we can expect even more chaos and ineptitude. Scotland is stuck in a toxic limbo with no immediate prospect of an end in sight, with plenty of scope for further damage to our public services under the dead hand of a governing party running on empty. There was much for Unionists to celebrate a few weeks ago when the SNP was punished for its long track record of failure. But the sting in the tail is that this crowd, a government in name only, aren't going anywhere until 2026, barring any unforeseen turns of events. Yet we simply can't afford to waste any more time on their destructive constitutional games. No one can seriously expect them to drop the doomed push for a second referendum or to stop banging on about a cause that was comprehensively rejected by the majority of Scots a decade ago. The rhetoric might be dialed down, but what remains of their support base wouldn't allow them to dump the crusade entirely. A move that would raise awkward questions about what precisely the SNP stood for, if not breaking apart the UK. There are about 4,000 hits for independence on the Scottish Government website. But, tellingly, only 3,500 for economic growth. This is a party that's plotted independence while reassuring the public that it would focus solely on saving lives, then embarked on a cull of ministerial WhatsApp messages, hampering the work of future inquiries. That didn't stop Baroness Hallett delivering a broadside last week against the SNP's threadbare pandemic planning and highlighting the role played by John Swinney, who was in charge of the resilience function of the Scottish Government while serving as Deputy First Minister. Now the man who masterminded part of the botched response to the worst public health emergency in living memory is in the top job, and insisting that lessons will be learned, a familiar mantra that most Scots will struggle to take seriously. Entrusting this dysfunctional bunch with planning for the disaster is a reckless act, given that it has presided over so many avoidable fiascos of its own creation. Mr. Swinney cannot escape Nicola Sturgeon's legacy, one he helped to shape. While she's under investigation as part of Operation Branchform, the long-running police fraud probe focusing on SNP's finances. Party's former chief executive Peter Morrell, Miss Sturgeon's husband, has been charged in connection with alleged embezzlement of SNP funds. The rout of the SNP on July 4 left Mr. Swinney in a precarious position. Leadership has been foisted on him after Humza Yousaf's resignation, but he ran a lamentable campaign. He's carrying the can of past blunders, but he was implicated in many of them, making it impossible to see him as anything other than a caretaker marking time until his forced retirement from frontline politics. In the meantime, government is more or less rudderless, with a lame duck leader clinging on by his fingertips and prioritising his own short-term survival over the business of running the country, always something of an afterthought for the SNP. The cabinet is an assortment of proven duds, no-hopers and placemen drawn from a shallow talent pool, and plainly out their depth. As we've reported over the past few days, a classroom and discipline crisis is spiralling out of control, and head teachers are rebelling against soft-touch, restorative practices championed by the SNP and the liberal hand-wringers who have turned our education system into a laughingstock. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth, a former teacher, has no plan to tackle it, or the problem of mass truancy, which means a lost generation of young Scots have been badly let down, with many of them likely to drift towards the dole queue. 1 in 3 Scots children were deemed to be persistent absentees after missing 10% or more of the school year in 2023. And 1 million school days were missed because of unexplained absences. Those who do turn up have to suffer at the hands of bullies and disruptive kids who assault them or their teachers, and are then allowed back into class days or even hours later. Kate Forbes, Mr Swinney's deputy, has toed the line, possibly biding her time for another tilt at leadership, but for all her welcome talk of growth, she is still webbed to independence. And as Finance Secretary, she drove a high-tax, low-growth agenda, which continues today. Fiona Hislop, the Transport Secretary, has remarkably little to say about the SNP's nationalisation of ScotRail, which has embarked on another round of reduced timetables and slashed services as rail unions threaten industrial action. Justice Secretary Angela Constance gave the green light for the early release of more than 500 criminals from crowded jails, and is now planning for long-term prisoners to be released after serving 2/3 of their sentence. The police service is so cash-strapped that it has effectively given up on probing minor crimes, while paying some of its officers to take part in pride marches. Neil Gray has failed to bring an iota of vision or energy to his vital health brief, despite waiting lists reaching a record high of 840,000. He replaced arrogant Michael Matheson, who tried to take taxpayers for a ride over his eye-watering £11,000 iPad bill. The SNP hierarchy strained every sinew to keep him in post, up until he quit in February, ahead of a damning report on the debacle. Mr Swinney disgraced himself by attacking the cross-party parliamentary committee, which imposed a suspension and financial penalty on the former health minister. Tribalism was placed ahead of propriety, not for the first time, contributing to the SNP's appalling performance at the ballot box earlier this month. We shouldn't underestimate the scope for more scandal in the run-up to May the 7th, 2026, when the next Holyrood poll is scheduled to take place. For now, we have a non-government with non-semblance of a plan for growth, which until recently was in partnership with the Marxist of the Green Party. As a fresh bout of civil war rages after the general election result, it is clear the SNP has no idea how to run itself, let alone Scotland. This is a zombie administration shuffling towards its inevitable day of reckoning, and it can't come soon enough. I think what the journalist has done there is encapsulated a really good opinion piece on where the SNP are at this moment in time. They are a shambles. They have got some disgraceful stats in there, and I don't want to go through the whole article line by line, but I just want to point out a couple of the sort of bizarre, crazy stats that that this guy's used in his article. And the first one that grabbed my eye was the fact if you go onto ScotGov's website, you'll find 4,000 mentions of independence and 3,500 mentions of economic growth. If this government would just bin the notion of independence, even for one cycle, and get on with managing a country, Scotland would be a far better place, without a shadow of a doubt. And some of the other things were just frightening. The bits about the school truancy rates, where we've got 10% of our children. Sorry, that's not true. It was worse than that. Let me just get it, because it just was a bit scary when we were talking about the figures for education. And there it is. 1 in 3 Scottish children are deemed to be persistently absent by being absent more than 10% of school days. Now, I'm quite sure some are, illness and things like that, but 1 in 3, a third of Scottish school children go to school less or miss at least 10% of the school day. That beggars belief. And between them, 1 million school days of unexplained absences. That's when they've not even gave a letter in to make up an excuse for not being at school. That's just not being at school. 1 million days. 1/3 of our children are not at school for more than 10% or more of the time. That is just incredible. These things are frightening. Now, the Scottish public electorate is somewhere around 3.5 million, something like that. The rest are children, or can't vote. But I'm sure the electorate's around about 3.5 million. I might be wrong. Whatever, I think the population of Scotland's about 6 million, 5.5, 6 million. 840,000 people out of that number are in waiting lists for healthcare. That just blows my mind. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what, 15%? Is that right? Certainly more than 10%. It just beggars belief how incompetent this mob are. But if you challenge them on it, all you'll hear is, it's Westminster's fault, it's Brexit's fault, it's the Tories' fault, and then a couple of weeks later when they come back for the holidays, it'll be, it's Labour's fault, right? Blame government. That's what it is, the blame game. I'm sick of it. I'm genuinely sick of it. This whole establishment needs pulled down and started again. I'm telling you, and I'm not even convinced that getting rid of the SNP would change much. But it would change the fact that we wouldn't have a government that just spoke about independence all the time, right? Because that's what they do, right? But if we replace that with just another party, another mainstream party, things going to miraculously become different. Because we've seen with the early days of what Labour are doing in Westminster. They are changing some stuff, but they're coming up with even worse ideas. Do you know what I mean? The Labour government decided to spend £87 million in one day to give to foreign countries in the hope, right? This is how they're going to challenge immigration, in the hope that the countries that they're giving the money to will somehow be able to encourage their citizens not to leave, right? Now, the way this works, I was listening to a radio show yesterday in the car, and they had a guy giving us the stats for the 1.2 million people that have flooded into the EU zone in the last 12 months, illegal immigrants. Crazy figures. And there was a cracking point. So UK government have gave all these foreign, lots of in Africa and stuff like that, countries money, a share of this £87 million. What they're going to do, I don't know, buy a new Rolls Royce. But somehow, Keir Starmer thinks this will stop people from those countries immigrating illegally to the UK. But they don't immigrate illegally directly to the UK. They come through the EU. Right? So the EU are liable for these people coming into the EU. It's them that should be giving them the bloody money. So I can remember seeing this story and thinking, why are we doing that? So I don't even know if a change of rosette will change much of the daftness. Right? I'm not convinced. And you think, well, yeah, we'll stop talking about independence, but will this stuff, will getting kids to school change? Will reducing the end? It's 840,000 people waiting for medical waiting lists. will anybody be able to change these things? Because I'm not convinced. And I think what we need in 2026 is a complete overhaul of the type of people we put into Holyrood. And it just beggars belief how... I thought I knew Scotland was bad and in a poor place. And this guy's just, managed to get a few stats into my head that I just wasn't aware of. So I can't do anything than thank Graham Grant, the journalist, for doing that. But this country's finished. Honestly, it's on its absolute knees. And we need people in power at Holyrood that can make it better. And it's got to be done quick. And we've got to have a 5-year cycle in Holyrood where the people in Holyrood, regardless of the rosette that they've got on their blazer on the way in, are big enough to go to work every day, put their hand in their heart and say, I'm going to make Scotland better than it is today. Because it's a terrible place. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please subscribe and hit the notifications bell. But most importantly of all, unless you're the SNP, the absolute crackpots that are running it, or the ever-decreasing number of cult members that still remain. See everyone else. Have a great day. Cheery bye now.